10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 170. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 170 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to be back with you. Hope you're all having a great summer out there and hope you're keeping your practicing up and keeping the learning going. So if you're new to the show, just wanted to welcome you in. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nick Manella. I'm the creator and host of this program, and we've been coming at you for way over 3 years here, bringing you a brand new jazz lesson each and every Friday. So if you are unaware, you can get the PDFs to every single episode. We provide a worksheet that goes along with every episode here. And you can find that by going to our Patreon site and pledging your support for $3 a month. There you can download all of these PDFs, put them into a booklet, and have a great companion through your jazz journey. So you can find that by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and clicking on one of the Patreon banners. Get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to all of those worksheets that we've ever done. Now, I wanted to give a quick shout out to a couple people that have signed up this week. And a quick note, I'm making this episode way in advance because I am going on vacation for a week, the week that this will be coming out. So if you signed up to become a patron, don't worry, you will get your shout out. It'll just be a week later because I'm making this like on July 30th here for an episode that comes out much later. So these people have signed up already. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Jack and Patrick. Thank you guys so much for joining the family. Really appreciate the support. You make sure that this podcast keeps coming at you each and every week and gets you those extras. And thank you to everybody else who signed up over there. You mean the world to us. Keep things happening over here. All right, so this is going to be part 2 of our Stylizing a Melody. In part 1, I tasked you with transcribing a Dexter Gordon melody. So hopefully you've done that. If you haven't done that, I really suggest that you get that done before you think about this week. Feel free to listen, but I kind of want you to do this stuff in order because it gets your mind in the right place and really is going to improve your playing on this important topic. So this one comes from one of our listeners, and actually this whole series came from David. He sent me an email about varying a melody, and he said something really interesting. He said he's not really a jazz player in the traditional sense, where he's not trying to go out there and, rip a crazy solo and play all this, double time and do all this stuff that a lot of us are thinking about doing and trying to learn how to do. He says that mainly he's a songwriter and he is performing stuff so that he can make the melody more interesting, right? So he's thinking about a way that he can kind of play the melody, 2-3 times in a row and keep it interesting so that he doesn't have to launch into this, super involved improvisation, but he can still perform and make things interesting. And I think this is really cool. This is like a really cool way to think about things. And I think if more improvisers actually thought about things this way, they would have more direction to their solo and they would be able to play a little bit more simply, which is always good. I think most of us, including myself, think that the more complicated you can get, the better, but there's a lot to be said for simplicity. So one of the tunes that he brought up was I Remember You. So I figured I would do this episode centering around that tune. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the first 8 bars of I Remember You, and we're going to start by playing it exactly like it's written in the real book. And then we're going to talk about some ways that we can change it and give you some things to think about going forward here on this standard or other standards. So let me start by playing exactly what's written in the real book, And then we'll talk about what that means and what we should shoot for when it comes to trying to play something outside of the notes that are written in the real book. Here's what's written in the book for I Remember You. So it's very clear. There's nothing wrong with that. Playing it like that is fine. But, most of the time we're going to want to go beyond that. What you'll notice about that, and that is actually written in your PDF, it's all quarter notes, whole notes, half notes. There is one quarter note triplet, which is kind of interesting. But when these people that wrote the real book wrote these tunes in there and chose to use the rhythms that they used, they fully intended on the musicians doing what they wanted to with it. So they wrote it in the simplest form possible. Almost think about it like a blank canvas for you to paint on, right? So we shouldn't be going by these rhythms as a rule because they're not designed to be that interesting. I mean, think about it like if you were a big band arranger. You would never write those rhythms for any section. You know that you have to stylize it. So you almost want to think like you're an arranger, but you're arranging on the spot instead of sitting down and thinking about it and really working it out. You're doing it in real time. And, that's what makes improvisation and playing this style of music really tough. So let's talk about a couple of things. So in variation 1, what I really focused on was syncopating my rhythms. And I think this is one of the best things that you can think about because we know that jazz is kind of based on syncopation. So playing things on the offbeats where they would normally come in on the beat, that's a really great way to just turn something that's not so interesting into something a heck of a lot more interesting. So in this pass, what I've done is I haven't added really any notes. I think I added a couple in the last measure. I added a little phrase where there was normally a rest in the last measure of that section. But for the rest of it, what I try to do is basically just shift the notes around so that they were a little bit more interesting, a little bit more unpredictable, and a little bit more syncopated. So you'll notice that I have a lot of stuff that starts and ends off of the beats, and I'm just trying to make it, a little bit more fun. A little bit less like, oh, I know exactly what this person is going to do next. And I'm accomplishing that through rhythm alone. I'm not adding anything in terms of notes, only rhythm. So take a peek at variation 1 on your PDF this week. And this is what I'm about to play right now. And I think you would agree that it is a little bit more interesting. Let's check this one out. So I think you'll hear, especially in the first measure, it's just more interesting, So instead of just playing 4 quarter notes, and quarter notes can be swinging, quite frankly, but I just like that variation 1 so much better. It just gives me such a sense of the swing eighth notes, and again, I've got that, that syncopation that's worked in there, and yeah, I just think it swings a lot more. So what I basically did was, I played quarter note on beat 1, just as in the first, the original theme. And then instead of playing 3 more quarter notes, I played 3 eighth notes instead. And I started those 3 eighth notes on the and of 2, hence that syncopation, right? And then in the second measure, I actually shifted that whole note to start on the and of 4. So just another small injection of syncopation and things that are just going to make it a little bit more interesting. Okay, so there is variation number 1. Now in variation number 2, I kept the idea of syncopation, but I did something that I tend to do very often and I think works really well and is very effective. I use some repeated notes. So turning quarter notes into eighth notes, but just playing the same note twice. And this can get you into trouble. Like if you do it too much, it's just going to sound kind of weird. But if you use it with discretion and pepper in some of these repeated notes, it can really work well. And one other note about this. So you'll notice in variation 1, I didn't really mess with bars 5, 6, and 7 of the melody because I feel like those are pretty interesting already. So if you have a spot with one of these standards where the majority of it is left up and is like a blank canvas and is left up to your own ideas, cool. But if you see some interesting rhythms like a quarter note triplet, that's usually something that's pretty intentional that we may want to keep fairly close to the original. So you'll notice in variation 2, I also kind of take that idea on things, and in measure 6, I don't really change that much. And I never change that quarter note triplet because I feel like that's very characteristic of this melody. So I don't want to go and try to rewrite an already great tune and take out some of the more interesting elements of it. So check out variation 2. This one combines some syncopation with some of that repeated note stuff that I was just talking about. Let's check this one out. So you can hear some of the repeated note stuff on that, and I'm still keeping some of that syncopation in there. So that's another great example of how you can vary your melody. But let's talk about kind of at the core of all of this, what you should be doing. So this is more of a feel than anything. You can't really plan out what you're doing. I guess you could to some extent, but I would rather have you not. So here's what I suggest really when you're practicing this stuff. Use some of the concepts that we just talked about, particularly syncopation. I think that syncopation is probably the most useful tool here. Put on a play along and play the melody 5 times in a row, just like David was talking about doing. But I don't want you to improvise at all. I want you to focus on playing the melody 5 times in a row and keeping it interesting all 5 times. And one other note about what I've done here. You'll notice that I didn't really do much with notes. I think sometimes when people think about like stylizing a melody, they think about, well, I have to add a bunch of notes. I have to add all these enclosures. I have to do all this kind of stuff. If you want to go outside the melody in terms of notes, just add like a neighbor tone here and there. So try going one note above or one note below the note that you're currently on. But that's as far as I want you to go. You can get into some of that other stuff later on, much later on, but try to make the most out of what's there already by manipulating the rhythm. The rhythmic manipulation is going to bring you a lot further and bear a lot more fruit than adding a bunch of notes is going to. These melodies are great. These are jazz standards for a reason. The melodies are fantastic. They're catchy. They're really impactful. So you don't need to go and rewrite the real book by adding all of your own notes. Change the rhythm. That's really the route to go. Okay? So hopefully you guys got something out of that. Let me know if you have any questions in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. That's the best way to get in touch, start a discussion. We've got a lot of members over there now, so we can have some great discussions if we so choose. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Remember, you can go and grab the PDF at our Patreon site, 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners, and that'll bring you over and give you instructions on what to do. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope you're having a great week. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week. Have a good one. Bye.